In this video, due to popular demand, I'm test driving my neighbour's Vauxhall Viva HC. Well, I must admit this is a pretty looking motor vehicle, so thanks to my neighbour for letting me have this drive. The car had been noticed in previous videos, and rightly so. It is very eye-catching. It is finished in a non-standard colour before we all get started, and the anoraks may have noticed this is actually the same shade as a Mini Cooper S of the newer shape, first generation. Very nice metallic blue colour. It works really well. We've got Revolution alloy wheels as well. We've got tiny little disc brakes on the front. This would have had drums originally, but yeah, I think the blue works really well with the chrome work. Let's see, we've even got fog light and reverse lights added by the owner. So really nice look. Also period correct, sort of. Parcel shelf speakers, probably 1980s, so it would have been an upgrade when this car was still probably in use originally. This is a very early HC Viva. It was built in the first year of production, 1970, though oddly it doesn't seem to have been registered until the summer of the following year. There's some talk of it might have been a development car, so it might have had a bit of factory life before it was actually registered. They did things like that back then. They'd muck about with cars and then send them off once they'd finished with them and just sell them as normal cars. This is the third generation of the Viva, Vauxhall's baby car, and really the last stab of independence for Vauxhall. After this, they were very much forced to go the Opel route. So the Chevette was sold alongside the HC Viva. It didn't replace it. One of the most common comments on my previous Viva video, that they were sold alongside, but really it was Vauxhall's last gasp. I think they just didn't want the Opel based Chevette taking over, but nonetheless it eventually did after almost 5 years of production. The very early Vivas had some nice design features. There's more of a, excuse my trainers, more of a crown on this panel, but apparently this was quite difficult to press, so they eventually flattened this curve out, this sort of scallop here, so it's got the correct early wings on it for an early car. Rob restored the car, completed the restoration 6 years ago, so it's the odd bubble of rust creeping in here and there now, but during the summer months he does use it alternately with his Volvo 740 as a daily driver. So I hear this fire up in the morning as he heads off to work. The restoration was very involved. It was really very rotten indeed, so we had to do an awful lot of work to get the car back to solid metal again. He didn't weld previously, but he learnt to on this car, so if anything else, he's an inspiration for me perhaps. We should start by having a look under the bonnet. Annoyingly, for a British designed car, the bonnet release is on the passenger side. Under here somewhere, there we go. It's even called hood. So maybe that's the influence of Wayne Cherry. Wayne Cherry worked at Vauxhall Design, famous American car designer, and there's the catch under here somewhere. There we go. I apologise that the car is a bit dark under the bonnet, bit of contrast going on today, but here is the engine. This would have originally been an 1159cc engine. They didn't upgrade it at first, but performance was so miserable that they upgraded it to a 1256 after a couple of years. So this is kind of an upgrade to that. This is a 1256cc engine. It's got a few modifications. We've got a Nicky carburettor, a little K&N pancake air filter, and a beefy 4-branch manifold, or maybe 3-branch manifold, but so extra performance going on down there as well. Not sure if it would have had an alternator when new, but this area is typical. This looks a bit rough. That's only because Rob formed these panels by hand, and apparently this was the first area he worked on, so I've no problem with that. I wouldn't expect to be able to make concourse repair panels after first attempt. Looks a bit neater this side. You can still see his welds, and one modification he's made is to make the wings bolt on. They were welded on originally, so if he needs to, he can easily remove them. Except heater pipes snaking off in there. We've got a K&N breather here, a little catch can, so a few upgrades, and I think there's an electric fan fitted in here now, so it hasn't got to rely on an engine driven fan. That makes it a bit quieter and helps a little with economy as well. And you can see the steering rack down here at the bottom. I'll just get my shadow out of the way. That's quite nicely located. He did say the original engine failed so hard that it threw a comrod out of the block with such force it damaged the steering rack. So that's one reason for having to upgrade things. We've got a Neutronic ignition system, so I think that's probably a points assisted one. Sensible upgrade. He's recently changed it to a spin-on oil filter, and he's got poly bushes on the suspension, and it is now negative ground, so maybe it would have been always an alternator, I'm not sure. So behind the engine is a 4-speed gearbox, and this lever goes straight into the top of it. And it's a very snicky, stubby little lever. So first is kind of where you'd expect third to be, and it's a lift and a cross to get into reverse. A little bit of a faff. There's a little clock down here and a battery cut off, and a modern head unit, so my neighbour can listen to his Enid Blyton discs while he's on the move. There's a little glove box up here. Oh, and this contains some photos of the rebuild work. So yeah, it was very, very crusty indeed. He did a lot of work forming up the panels. Took quite a few years to get done. He didn't spray it himself, he did get someone to do that. Someone who looked at the tin of paint and went, this looks like a really bad idea. But look at the rear, having to reshape all this. Yeah, I think he learnt a lot while working on this car. The dashboard is quite different to the later one. I've already driven a later HC, so we've got no stalk for the wipers. They're on a switch. Oh, here, and are apparently live even when the ignition's off. And a light switch, much as you'd expect. Little ashtray. I think that's about the only item that carries over. It's a fairly comprehensive redesign of the dash. Down here we've got a choke control, which is a twist and lock, and it actually does, plus some bonus switches for the reverse and fog lights. Illuminated switches are a requirement. Down here we have an organ pedal throttle, and pedals otherwise much as you'd expect. Sport steering wheel has been added, and yeah, I quite like it. Quite a chunky little thing. Indicator stalk here with a horn there, a good horn. Fresh air ventilation to the face, always really nice to have. But overall the visibility is very good because you've got huge windows and there's those speakers on the back. But obviously black vinyl on a day like today, there is a reason I am not wearing shorts. The windows do wind, and it's quite a nice mechanism given how large the glass is, so that's quite good. But important business. You can hear the fuel pump's got an electric fuel pump upgrade. Screen wash is a push down here. Oh, there we go. And it does go absolutely everywhere. And we should put the wipers on. There we go. See if we can catch some on the actual windscreen. Yeah, probably work better as you're driving along, I should imagine. When dry, there is a triangle of doom, but it looks like there is overlap to prevent that when the wipers are fully lubricated and at speed. Although that triangle is right in front of the driver. So again, things have improved with age, I feel. The entire seat tips to allow access to the rear. Oh, I'll fold myself in and pull the seat down. And yeah, leg room's a bit tight, but it is worth remembering this is the baby car in the family. But I've got more headroom than you've got in the back of a Citroen GS or GSA of equivalent age. But the seat is quite short, so look, it's just not supporting my legs at all really. Far more for children. We seem to be missing the trim on that side, but we've got it here, complete with a little ashtray, a little clip to hold the seat belts in place. They are static on this side. We don't have rear seat belts at all, but look at that. Lovely, proper 1980s stuff going on. I'm going to allow myself to get out again because it's feeling a little claustrophobic here. Boot space. There's a surprising amount for what looks like quite a low boot. Quite a high lip to get over to get your stuff in. Spare wheel located here. Random stuff floating around, including a thermostat, I note. And it looks like the battery's been relocated to the rear as well. But it doesn't take up too much space. Lovely. Right, I think we should go for a drive. For after all, is that not the main appeal of these older cars? Now this is a car from when tinny was a thing, so you close the door and it goes through the entire structure. But yeah, it's very much of its era, I think. So there's the fuel pump, start the engine. And it's very smoothly and very quietly fires into life. It seems to run very smoothly on this carburetor. Idle speed's maybe a little on the low side, but it's fine. But yeah, the main thing you notice is because there's no engine driven fan, it's actually quite peaceful. So this is a test drive where we start going backwards so I can get out of this car park. And then into first. Might have to use the handbrake because we're on a hill. And we're away. And it is not a brisk car. That is the first thing that strikes you. There's a very characterful whine from the transmission, probably the rear axle. But yeah, it's quite jolly. We got coil springs on the back with I think it's got Avo shocks all round, adjustables, which I'll set soft, but it's still a little bouncy at the back. It's not the last word in refinement when it comes to suspension, but it's probably better than its rivals that were still using leaf springs. I think the Escort was still on leaf springs at this time. A bit tricky to get second without a crunch. Bit of rev matching helps. But one thing that strikes me straight away, especially compared to my GSA, my Citroen, is the steering is really nicely weighted, even with this smaller steering wheel. And it's got slightly fatter rubber on those lovely little period wheels. And I was expecting the steering to be a lot heavier than it is. You give the brakes a shove, and they do work, but you really do have to lay on them a bit, because no servo and disc brakes. It wouldn't have had discs from the factory, and in fact when Vauxhall did fit the discs, which came fairly early, I think around 72, 73, they did do a servo, so a servo with the front discs. Some say you get a better pedal feel without the servo. Certainly just feels a little more predictable, I think is the phrase. It's a very jolly little car. It makes jolly noises, it looks jolly, it gets a lot of attention when you're driving it. So yeah, very likeable car. Right, we'll get out on the open road and we can give it a beans a bit more, albeit only at 40 miles an hour to begin with. Oh, the gearbox is improving now, it's warming up actually. We're up to 40 miles an hour now. The engine feels very happy in this little power band here. So it would have originally had a Zenith carburetor. I'm not sure why I've wound the window up. I'm not sure it's made it any quieter in here. It just seems to have made it more boomy. But really what strikes you is it's just a lack of refinement. And I think it kind of proves, as I concluded in my previous HC test, this car didn't move the game on at all from the HB, and it's no wonder they began to feel a bit dated, because they were. This is old hat. This isn't particularly fresh for 1970, so when production finally ended in I think 79 to make way for the Astra, yeah, it really was very old-fashioned. Of course, so were some of its rivals. The Morris Marina was in production throughout the 70s, also very aged in design. I'd say this feels a little more sprightly, a little more modern than the Marina. probably on the count of it's got a rather more advanced front end, proper double wishbone suspension here, whereas the Morris Marina still had the lever arm dampers that were quite novel on a Morris Minor with independent front suspension in 1948. So whenever I do these tests, I do always try to think of the car in context. So it's not that I'm picking on the car for being old, it's that I'm trying to compare it with its rivals. And you know, the Ford Escort, the bread and butter Escorts, Mark 1 and 2, were not very special cars at all, really. They made similar noises, they had similar issues, they rotted terribly. But I think this car has had a few more modern improvements that do improve the driving experience. And one of those is removing that fixed engine fan. I think later ones had a viscous fan, but it just makes it a little more refined. Just coming down to the delightful town of Aberaeron. I would love to take you for a spin around the town, but that is not possible today due to the restrictions in place. They've actually pedestrianised the centre, which is probably sensible. It gets very busy down towards the harbour in Aberaeron. So it's not a fast car. If you wanted a fast Vauxhall on a small scale, you could get the Magnum, which had the slant 4 overhead cam engine, and they did do Vivas with those bigger engines for the first few years, and I think it was about 75 and the Magnum, or maybe 73, the Magnum came in. Then there was the Droop Snoot Forenza with his Getrag gearbox, which is quite horrible to use. In fact, I don't like them at all. But for my money, I'm quite happy with this. This is enough motor vehicle for me. Turning circle demonstration. Oh yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, not bad. Here we go. This isn't a full 0 to 60 because I'm not extending it particularly far in gear. I'm not trying to race it because it is an older car. These engines aren't the most robust, but that's us up to 50. But by the time you get to 60, it's feeling a little revvy, but ease off and it does quieten down a little. But yeah, the steering is good. You have to be a bit respectful of the fact it's rear wheel drive, even with a fatter rubber on. But it's quite a good car to drive a little quickly, and you know, 50-60 miles an hour feels quite quick in this car, especially given how hard you have to shove the brakes. But the steering is just lovely. It's beautifully weighted. Yeah, very likeable. So there you go, in this anniversary year of the HC Viva, 50 years, how time flies. Yeah, that was my neighbour's lovely Vauxhall Viva. I hope you've enjoyed that. Don't forget you can head to the store for merchandise and support options, or head to patreon.com/HubNut if that's your thing, or look at YouTube channel memberships. Look for the join button on my channel and beneath my videos. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Farewell.